You'd be a liability here alone. The words weren't shouted. They didn't have to be. Chloe delivered them with the gentle, final precision of a scalpel. Her voice thick, with a pity that was more insulting than any scream. She sat opposite me, on the white leather sofa that Richard and I had picked out together. It felt like a lifetime ago. It was only a year. "It's for the best, Mum," she continued, leaning forward, her perfectly manicured hands resting on her knees. "You can't even work the smart fridge. We had to reset it twice last week." My son Liam didn't look at me. His attention was surgically attached to the glowing screen of his phone, a shimmering, holographic blueprint of this very house, our house, hovered above it. He was swiping through listings, through alternative futures for this space that held 50 years of my life. He was liquidating my past before my eyes. "The facility has a lovely garden," he said to the blueprint, not to me. "State-of-the-art security."
You'll be comfortable. Comfortable. A word for a pet. A word for a piece of furniture you put in storage. The air in the cavernous living room was still thick with the cloying scent of funeral lilies. 3 days. It had been only 3 days since we buried Richard. 3 days since I stood graveside, my children's arms around me, their whispers of, "We'll take care of you, Mum," feeling like a promise. I see now they weren't promises. They were plans. This is my home. Or it was. I looked around at the towering glass walls that overlooked the Atherton Hills. I remembered the arguments Richard and I had with the architect. I wanted more warmth, more wood. Richard, ever the futurist, wanted glass and steel, a monument to transparency and modernity. The smart systems, the integrated network, the security protocols that made this house a fortress, those were my design. A quiet project I undertook while he was busy being the face of the company, the visionary. I was the ghost in our own machine, long before my children decided to exercise me. "A liability," Chloe had said. The word echoed in the sudden silence. A liability. Like a frayed wire, a leaky pipe, something to be fixed, or in my case, removed, disposed of, placed in a facility with a lovely garden. "We've already spoken to the director at Silver Pines," Liam continued, finally looking up from his phone. His eyes were his father's, but they held none of Richard's warmth. They were the eyes of a CEO evaluating an underperforming asset. "They have an opening in their assisted living wing. The intake process is next Tuesday." Next Tuesday. In 6 days, my life was scheduled for demolition. My gaze drifted to the digital photo frame on the mantel. It was cycling through pictures of a life I thought we'd all shared. Liam's first steps, right here on this floor. Chloe's high school graduation, her face beaming. Family vacations where Richard would insist on taking endless photos. In every single one, I was there, smiling, a constant solid presence. Now, looking at my children's faces, I felt like I was looking at strangers who had stolen my family's photographs and inserted themselves into the frame. "We have to be practical, Mom," Chloe said, her voice softening into that tone she used when she was about to deliver the worst news. It was the same tone she used to tell me the biopsy results for the cat. "Dad's estate is complex. The board is meeting. Investors are calling. We can't be worried about you setting off the fire alarm because you tried to make toast in the smart oven again." The incident with the oven. I had used the manual override, the one I had insisted the engineers include. It had sent a fault notification to Chloe's phone, and she had treated it like I had nearly burned the house to the ground. It was a minor inconvenience for her, and now it was a line item in the evidence file for my incompetence. My entire existence was being reframed as a series of small, pathetic failures. I didn't argue. What was there to say? My voice felt like it was buried under 1,000 feet of earth, next to my husband. The fight had left my body the moment I saw Liam scrolling through real estate apps. This wasn't a discussion. It was a verdict. I was a relic, an analog creature in a digital world they now controlled, a world I had helped build. The irony was a physical pain, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "We'll have your things packed," Liam said, standing up. "Just the essentials. Silver Pines is fully furnished." He pocketed his phone, the holographic house vanishing into thin air. My home dismissed with a flick of his thumb. "We're having a few people over tonight. Investors. It's important we project stability. It would be best if you just rested in your room." He walked away without a backward glance. Chloe lingered for a moment, a mask of sympathy etched on her beautiful face.
"He's just stressed, Mum. This is hard on all of us." She patted my hand. Her touch was cold. "Just try to get some sleep." She followed her brother, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound was sharp, definitive. The closing of a door, the locking of a cage. I sat there alone in the cavernous room, the ghost in the machine, listening to my own life being dismantled. That night, the house, my house, came alive without me. The low thrum of a curated playlist vibrated through the floorboards, the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, the bright, brittle sound of laughter. I was an exile in my own bedroom. The door closed as I had been instructed. From my window I could see the glow of the poolside lights and the silhouettes of people mingling on the terrace. Strangers were drinking my husband's expensive scotch on my patio furniture. I couldn't stay in the room. It felt like a coffin. I opened the door a crack. The sounds grew louder, sharper. I crept out into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the plush runner. The grand staircase curved down into the foyer, offering a perfect clandestine view of the party below. It was a sea of dark suits and cocktail dresses. My children moved through the crowd like sharks, all teeth and predatory smiles. Liam stood near the massive fireplace, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was holding court, his voice booming with a confidence he never had when his father was alive. He looked powerful. He looked like Richard. "It's about honouring the foundation he built," Liam was saying to a man with a silver watch that probably cost more than my first car. "And evolving it. Sterling Enterprises isn't just a company, it's a legacy." Legacy. The word hung in the air. I saw Chloe across the room, her phone held up, recording a video. Her smile was wide, ecstatic. She was documenting her ascension. I imagined the caption, #Sterling Empire, #Building the Future, #Legacy. There would be no picture of the woman upstairs, the one who wrote the source code for their gilded life. I didn't exist in their narrative. I was a footnote they were actively erasing. I clutched the cold, wrought iron banister, the one I had sketched on a napkin for the blacksmith all those years ago. My knuckles were white. Down below, Liam raised his glass.
The conversations quieted. All eyes turned to him. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice resonating through the house. "To a man who was more than just a founder. He was a visionary, a titan. He built an empire from nothing but his own brilliant mind and sheer force of will." A lie. A beautiful, polished, profitable lie. My mind flashed back to the late nights, the endless pots of coffee, the scribbled notebooks filled with cryptographic equations that only I could understand. Richard was the salesman, the showman. He could sell ice in a blizzard. But I was the architect. I was the one who built the engine. He just knew how to drive it. "He taught us that the future belongs to the bold," Liam continued, his gaze sweeping over the rapt faces of his audience. "And in his honor, we will be bolder than ever. We are entering a new era for Sterling. To the future, and to the brilliant, enduring legacy of Richard Sterling." A chorus of "To Richard" and "To Sterling" rose up. Glasses clinked. A wave of applause filled the hall. And in that sound, I heard my own erasure. It was the sound of my life being paved over. Every sacrifice, every secret, every ounce of brilliance I had poured into that man and his legacy was being attributed to him, buried with him. I watched Chloe post her video, her thumb tapping out the hashtags that would cement this fiction into the digital record. She laughed and hugged a woman in a sequined dress. They were celebrating on my grave, and I hadn't even died yet. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound, hollow emptiness. A void. I was a ghost in the machine of my own life, a phantom haunting the hallways of a home that was no longer mine. Listening to my children toast to a history I was never in, I retreated back into the shadows of the upstairs hallway, the sound of the party fading behind me. The verdict had been delivered. The sentence had begun. I was already gone. My name is Emily Sterling. I am 68 years old. My children see a frail woman who fumbles with a television remote, a relic of a bygone era who needs to be managed. But before I was their mother, before I was Richard's wife, I was something else entirely. I was a mind on fire. I remember the campus at MIT, the way the autumn air over the Charles River carried the scent of cold water and old paper. The world back then felt like a grand, intricate puzzle, and I had been born with the key. I wasn't just a student. I was a prodigy, a ghost in the hallowed halls of mathematics on a full scholarship, and just 2 semesters away from my doctorate in a field that was still a frontier: cryptography. It wasn't about numbers, to me. It was about language. It was about creating a silence so profound, so mathematically perfect, that no one could break it. I could build walls of pure logic, fortresses of algorithm that were invisible, untouchable. My professors spoke of my work in hushed, reverent tones, of a future at the NSA or a research institution where I would write the very rules of digital security for the coming age. I lived and breathed in a world of elegant proofs and unbreakable ciphers. It was a world of absolute order, of pristine, beautiful truth. And then I met Richard Sterling. He wasn't a mathematician. He couldn't tell a prime number from a bus schedule. But he had a fire of a different kind. When he walked into a room, he didn't just enter it, he consumed it. He had a vision that burned so brightly it blinded everyone around him, myself included. He spoke of a future where information was the new currency, and protecting it would be the world's greatest challenge.
He saw my work not as academic theory, but as a weapon, a shield, a foundation. He saw an empire. I remember our first real date at a small Italian place in the North End. He listened, truly listened, as I tried to explain the beauty of asymmetric key encryption. His eyes weren't glazed over like most people's. They were lit with a terrifying, exhilarating understanding. He didn't grasp the math, not really, but he grasped the power. He saw the kingdom that could be built upon it. That night, walking back along the river, he took my hands. His were so warm. "Em," he said, his voice a low, persuasive hum. "What you have, it's a once-in-a-generation gift, but the world, the men in those boardrooms, the venture capitalists, they aren't ready for a female genius like you. They won't see the mind. They'll just see the woman." He paused, letting the cold truth of his words hang in the air between us. "Let me be the face," he whispered, his thumb tracing a pattern on my palm. "You be the brain. We'll be a team. I'll build the company, and you'll build the walls that protect it. Anonymously. Our secret." He framed it as a strategy, a necessary deception to navigate a world that wasn't yet enlightened. I wasn't being erased, I was being protected. I was being made the silent, revered partner in a grand endeavour. And I, a woman who had spent her life in the stark, unambiguous world of logic, fell for the most illogical thing of all. I believed him. I loved him. So I gave him my work. I gave him my future. I designed the entire security architecture for his first startup, Sterling Systems. I coded it in our small apartment, late at night, fueled by cheap coffee and his electrifying belief in us. The intricate, multi-layered protocol that became the industry gold standard, the very foundation of the Sterling Empire. That was born from my mind. It was my masterpiece, and I signed it with his name. And so, the architect of digital fortresses became the curator of a glass house. The language of code, with its perfect syntax and irrefutable logic, was slowly, imperceptibly, replaced by a new vocabulary. The language of colic, of parent-teacher conferences, of Liam's seasonal allergies and Chloe's ballet recitals. My world of infinite possibility shrank to the finite dimensions of our sprawling home. I stepped back from the console and stepped into the role of Mrs. Sterling. My days became a different kind of algorithm, one of social calculus and domestic logistics. I managed the staff with quiet efficiency. I planned dinner parties where senators and CEOs would unknowingly be surrounded by the very security architecture I had authored. I learned the names of every important client's spouse, their children's schools, their favourite wine. I became an expert in flower arrangements, in seating charts, in the flawless, seamless facade of the Sterling family. I built a different kind of fortress, one of social grace and impeccable taste. I remember one evening I was in the kitchen tasting a bisque for a gala we were hosting. Liam, he must have been 7, ran in with a scraped knee crying. As I was cleaning the cut and kissing his forehead, the television was on in the den. A news anchor was interviewing Richard. They were talking about a major corporate espionage attempt that had been thwarted. The CEO of the targeted company was praising Sterling Systems. "Richard Sterling is a visionary," the man said. "His security protocol is a decade ahead of everyone else. It's like a ghost in the machine. Utterly invisible, completely unbreakable." Richard on the screen just smiled that charming, humble smile of his. He adjusted his tie, and in the kitchen, with the smell of thyme and cream in the air,
and the weight of my small son in my lap. I felt a strange, hollow echo. A part of me, the part that still remembered the hum of a mainframe, felt a flicker of pride. That was my work, my ghost, my machine. But that feeling was immediately washed away by a stronger one, the feeling of Liam's hand clutching mine. This was my life now. This was my choice. Richard never stopped acknowledging my contribution, but only in private. It became our little joke, our intimate secret. After a long day, he'd come home, loosen his tie and say, "My secret weapon saved the company another fortune today." Or, when a competitor's system failed, he'd kiss my cheek and whisper, "They should have had you." He called me his secret weapon. It sounded romantic. It sounded like a partnership. It made me feel essential, cherished, the hidden queen behind the celebrated king. I didn't see it for what it was, a cage. A beautiful, comfortable, gilded cage where my genius was kept as a private pet. I was a weapon, but one that was never to be taken out of its velvet-lined box in public. I wasn't a partner. I was a resource. He had my mind, my name, my children, my life. I just called it being a wife. And for 50 years I thought that was enough. The silence that followed the party was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house, it was the sterile, humming silence of a facility. The air itself felt filtered, managed. When I woke, the morning light seemed different, as if it too had been given new instructions on how to enter my room. Liam found me in the sunroom, staring at the garden I had spent 30 years cultivating. He was holding my laptop, cradling it in his hands like a piece of evidence. "Morning, Mum," he said, his voice imbued with a practiced, gentle tone he usually reserved for difficult clients. He sat opposite me, placing the laptop on the glass table between us with a soft click. "We need to make a few changes around here, for your own safety." I looked from his face to the laptop. My laptop, the one Richard had bought me, the one I used for recipes, for emails to my sister, for sorting through the digital clutter of a long life. "We've had a security consultant come in," he continued, not waiting for my response. "He recommended a full network overhaul, new passwords, new protocols. It's much more secure now." He patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like he was checking a piece of porcelain for cracks. His touch was brief, cool. "You don't need to worry about any of it." Worry was a distant country. What I felt was a cold dread, a creeping frost at the edges of my world. Later, I tried to turn on the lamp beside my armchair, using the voice command I had helped Richard program years ago. "Lights on," I said, my voice feeling thin in the unresponsive room. Nothing happened. I tried again. The silence that answered was absolute. I walked to the wall panel, the glowing screen that controlled the climate, the lighting, the security. It prompted me for a password. My old code. My birthday, Richard's, our anniversary. None of them worked. The house. My house. A home whose digital nervous system I had helped design now regarded me as an intruder, an unknown user, a guest. The exile was swift and total. The next day, Chloe sat me down at the kitchen island. She had a stack of envelopes and a brittle smile. She always looked so much like Richard when she was about to deliver bad news. "Mum, we've been reviewing the finances," she began, her tone brisk and efficient. She fanned out a few credit card statements on the marble countertop, my statements. There are a lot of redundancies and, frankly, a lot of vulnerabilities. People your age are prime targets for scams. She didn't look at me as she spoke. Her eyes were fixed on the papers, as if I were a line item to be managed. She pushed a single, cheap-looking plastic card across the cool stone towards me. It was a prepaid debit card, the kind you buy at a grocery store. "We've cancelled your other cards," she said, gathering up my old life of financial independence and stuffing it into a manila envelope. "It's for the best. We'll load this one with an allowance for you each week. Just for little things, you know, a magazine, maybe some yarn." She finally looked at me, a smile tight and stretched. "So you don't get taken advantage of." The word allowance hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I was 68 years old, and I was being given an allowance. I didn't say anything, I just stared at the flimsy piece of plastic. It was a leash. The small indignities began to accumulate, piling up like dust in an unloved room. At dinner, Liam and Chloe and her husband would discuss their ambitious plans for the company, their voices sharp and excited, while I sat at the end of the table. They started giving me my meals on a different plate. A heavy ceramic one they said was sturdier. Then it became a high-lipped bowl to prevent spills. One evening, Chloe's son, young Leo, knocked his glass of juice over. As Chloe's wife, Sarah, cleaned it up, she glanced at my water glass and then at Chloe. The next night, my water was served in a thick plastic tumbler, the kind you use for a picnic. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there. "Is she eating enough?" Liam would ask Chloe, his fork halfway to his mouth. "She seems a bit more confused today, don't you think?" Chloe would reply, not looking in my direction. They were discussing my mind as if it were a faulty appliance. My favourite armchair in the living room, the one with the worn fabric that perfectly moulded to my back, was moved. One day, it was just gone. I found it later, pushed into a dark corner of the guest bedroom upstairs, covered with a dust sheet. Sarah said the new sofa they'd ordered wouldn't fit otherwise. "It really threw off the feng shui, Emily," she'd said with an apologetic shrug. My world shrank to the size of my bedroom. The television, a large smart screen that Richard and I had mounted on the wall, was suddenly locked. "Parental controls activated," it read. When I asked Chloe about it, she said, "Oh, we just don't want you watching the news, Mum. It's so stressful and confusing. It's not good for your blood pressure." They were curating my reality, sanding off any edge that might prove I was still a thinking, feeling person. I was being wrapped in cotton wool, not for my protection, but for their convenience. I was a problem they were solving, one locked device and plastic cup at a time. A few weeks drifted by in this grey fog of managed existence. The only flicker of warmth in the house came from Maya. Chloe's daughter was 16, with her father's kind eyes and a spirit that hadn't yet been tailored to fit the family's ambitions. She was the only one who didn't speak to me in that slow, patronising tone. She would pop into my room after school, flop onto my bed, and tell me about her day, about the boy in her chemistry class, or the frustrations of her coding homework. She spoke to me like I was a person. Chloe tried to police these interactions.
"Maya, honey, don't bother your grandmother. She needs her rest,"
she'd call from the hallway. But Maya would just roll her eyes and lower her voice, sharing a small conspiratorial secret with me. One afternoon, she found me staring at my old tablet, my fingers fumbling with the screen. The guest network they had relegated me to was a digital dead end. Web pages timed out, emails wouldn't load. The loading icon just spun and spun, a perfect metaphor for my life. It was another wall, another way to keep me contained and powerless.
"Grandma,
"What are you doing?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. I'm trying to look up a knitting pattern, I said, the frustration making my voice hoarse. But this thing? It won't connect properly? Maya let out an exasperated sigh. Not at me, but at the situation. Oh my God, they have you on the guest Wi-Fi. That's insane. It's basically useless. They throttle the bandwidth so it doesn't interfere with their work calls. She took the tablet from my hands with a gentle confidence. This is just dumb. Let me fix it. She sat on the edge of the bed, her thumbs a blur across the screen. She navigated to the Wi-Fi settings, her brow furrowed in concentration. Okay, look. Dad set up this network with a root admin account ages ago. It has full, unrestricted access. Nobody ever uses it because they're all on their own prioritized accounts. She tapped a few more times. The password is probably still the ridiculously insecure default he set up back then. Her fingers typed a short string of characters. I saw it flash on the screen for a moment. Kasparov 1. A name from a ghost life. My ghost life. Richard's old inside joke for me, the queen who secretly controlled his board. The tablet screen flickered. The Wi-Fi symbol at the top of the screen, which had been showing a single pathetic bar, suddenly lit up, full and strong. A web page I had been trying to open for 10 minutes snapped into view instantly. The digital world in all its high-speed glory rushed back in. Maya smiled, completely unaware of the monumental significance of what she had just done. There, all fixed. Now you can actually stream your shows without it buffering forever. She handed the tablet back, gave my shoulder a quick squeeze, and bounced out of the room, calling out that she was going to grab a snack. I sat there holding the tablet. It felt heavier now, charged with a new potential. Maya hadn't just given me better internet. She had, in her innocent kindness, passed a master key through the bars of my cage. She had given a ghost the keys to the kingdom. For the first time in months, I felt something other than the dull ache of despair. It was a faint flicker, deep inside. A pilot light I thought had long been extinguished. The access was a secret I kept close. For days, I did nothing with it. I simply savoured the quiet power of a fast connection. I read the news they had tried to shield me from. I watched documentaries. I reconnected with the world outside the suffocating walls of my own home. It was enough, for a while, to just feel a little less erased. But the past has its own gravity. It pulls on you. The loneliness was a constant, hollow presence, and it drove me to seek comfort in the familiar. I wanted to see Richard smile. I wanted to see Liam and Chloe as children running through a sprinkler on a summer afternoon, their faces alight with a joy that seemed impossible now. I wanted to remember a time when this family was a source of love, not a board of directors managing my decline. It happened on a Tuesday. The day was nondescript, a flat, grey sky outside my window. The house was quiet. Liam was at the office. Chloe was at a lunch meeting. I was alone. Fueled by a wave of potent nostalgia, I picked up the tablet and navigated to the bookmark I'd made a decade ago. The Sterling Vault. It was our family's private cloud server. I had come up with the name. It held everything. 50 years of digitized photographs, from grainy black and whites of my own parents to the high-definition videos of Maya's first steps. It held school report cards, scanned love letters Richard and I had written, holiday videos, birthday parties, every mundane and precious moment of our lives, all meticulously organized into a digital fortress of memory. My fingers, moving with an old, familiar muscle memory, typed in my username and password, the ones I had used for years. The screen showed a loading icon. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it would open. I leaned closer. Then the words appeared. Stark, impersonal, brutal. Access denied. A mistake, I thought. My heart hammered against my ribs. I must have mistyped. I entered the password again, slowly this time, each character a careful, deliberate press. Access denied. I tried an older password, a variation. I tried my administrator credentials from when I first set it up. Nothing. The same two words over and over, a digital wall absolute and insurmountable. The truth washed over me in a sickening, cold wave. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. They hadn't just changed the Wi-Fi password and cancelled my credit cards. They had gone into the heart of our shared history and surgically removed me. They had locked me out of my own memories. The photos of me holding my children as newborns, the videos of me teaching them to ride a bike, the image of me standing beside my husband, proud and smiling. All of it was now behind a door to which I no longer held the key. I wasn't just a burden to be managed, I was a chapter they were actively trying to delete. The humiliation of the plastic cup, the condescending pats on the hand, the silent dinners. All of it was just a prelude. This was the true act of cruelty. This was the final lockout. The tablet slipped from my fingers and landed with a soft thud on the duvet. The room, which a moment before had been a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. I stared at the blank wall, but I saw only those two words burned onto the back of my eyelids. Access denied. I was a ghost in my own home, a stranger in my own life. And now, I was a memory they had chosen to discard. I sat there in the growing darkness of the afternoon, a profound emptiness hollowing me out from the inside. I was no longer a relic of a bygone era. I was a file they had dragged to the trash. I was erased. A few days after the party, the silence in the house became its own kind of noise. It was a thick, suffocating blanket, woven from my children's disregard. They moved through the halls with the brisk, unapologetic energy of new owners, their voices sharp and clear through the walls, always discussing logistics, figures, and futures that had no room for me. I had retreated to my bedroom, the one space that still felt mine, though even its familiarity was beginning to feel borrowed. The scent of Richard's cologne had finally faded from his side of the closet, and with it, the last whisper of the life we had shared. I was adrift, a ghost in a house of memories that were being systematically unplugged. The doorbell chimed one afternoon, a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the sterile quiet. I heard Liam's heavy sigh from the hallway, the sound of someone inconvenienced. "Who now?" he muttered, followed by Chloe's clipped response. "Just get it. It's probably another floral arrangement. Tell them to leave it on the porch." But it wasn't flowers. I heard the door open, a brief, muffled exchange, and then a new voice, one I hadn't heard in years. It was calm, measured, and held an authority that Liam's voice instinctively yielded to. "I am here to see Mrs. Sterling, alone." A moment of silence, then Liam's sputtered protest. "She's resting. It's not a good time. Can we take a message?" "That won't be necessary," the voice replied with the finality of a gavel striking wood. "I am David Chen. I was your father's personal counsel. My business is with your mother." I heard footsteps approaching my door. Not Liam's impatient stomp or Chloe's staccato click, but the steady, deliberate tread of the man, David Chen. A soft knock. "Mrs. Sterling, may I have a moment?" I opened the door. He stood there, exactly as I remembered him from the few formal events I'd been required to attend over the years. His suit was a severe conservative grey, perfectly tailored, not a single thread out of place. His face was lean, his expression unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. He looked past me, his gaze sweeping over Liam and Chloe, who hovered behind him like vultures circling a potential meal. "Liam, Chloe," David said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My instructions from your father were explicit on this matter. I need to speak with your mother in private. Please wait downstairs." Chloe's face tightened. "Anything you have to say to our mother, you can say to us. We're handling her affairs now." David Chen didn't even blink. He simply adjusted his tie, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "Your father's final instructions supersede any current arrangements. I will not repeat myself." They looked at each other, a flicker of uncertainty passing between them. The mention of their father's final instructions was a leash they couldn't break. Defeated, they turned and descended the stairs, their whispers trailing behind them like bitter perfume. David stepped into my room and closed the door behind him, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet space. He gestured to the small armchair by the window, and I sat, my hands folded in my lap. He remained standing, a sentinel of secrets. "Emily," he said, using my first name for the first time I could remember. It sounded strange, foreign. Richard was a complicated man. He planned for every eventuality, including this one. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and placed a small, heavy object on the polished wood of my nightstand. It made a solid, definitive sound. It was a chess piece, a queen, carved from a single piece of black obsidian. It was flawless, cold to the touch, and it seemed to suck the light out of the room. It was one of a kind. I knew because I had been with Richard in a dusty market in Oaxaca when he'd commissioned it decades ago. A gift for his queen. "Richard's final contingency," David said, his voice low. "He called it the Kasparov Protocol. It is now active." Kasparov. The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. A password to a life I had locked away. It was my alias, my ghost name from the early days at MIT, the name I used when I wrote the foundational code for Richard's first company, a name no one but Richard was supposed to know. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes were locked on the obsidian queen. "This is for you," David continued, his professional mask still firmly in place. He then produced a single, old-fashioned skeleton key, its brass tarnished with age. He laid it next to the queen. "This opens a safe deposit box at the First National Bank on Montgomery Street in San Francisco. Box number 713. He paused, letting the information settle. "My legal obligation to Richard is now fulfilled. What you do with this information is entirely your decision. My card is on the table. Should you require further conventional legal services." He placed a crisp white business card next to the key and the queen. "Good day, Emily." And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the room now filled with the weight of the objects on my nightstand, the cold black queen, the tarnished key. They weren't mementos. They were a summons, a challenge from beyond the grave. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I acted with purpose, a single, clear objective in mind. I dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, the clothes of an invisible older woman. I used the prepaid debit card Chloe had given me for your little essentials, mother, to call a taxi. The dispatcher's voice was tinny and impatient, but it was a connection to the outside world, a world I was about to re-enter. Riding in the back of the cab, watching the familiar streets of our manicured suburb give way to the sprawling, anonymous grid of the city, I felt a flicker of something I thought was long dead. Anticipation. The bank was an old, formidable building of granite and marble, a temple to money and secrets. Inside, the air was cool and hushed. I presented the key and a copy of my old ID, which I'd found tucked away in a jewellery box. The bank officer, a young man with a polite but bored expression, led me through a gate of polished steel and down a silent, carpeted corridor into the vault. The air grew colder. He used his key, then mine. The heavy steel door of box 713 swung open with a soft, expensive sigh. He slid out a long metal container and placed it on a table in a small, private viewing room before leaving me alone. My heart was pounding. My hands, which had trembled with age and uncertainty for years, were surprisingly steady as I lifted the lid. Inside there was no jewellery, no stacks of cash, no sentimental letters. There were only 2 items resting on a bed of black velvet. The first was a burner phone, a cheap, disposable piece of plastic. It was the kind of thing you see in spy movies, a tool for those who don't want to be traced. The second was a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was heavy in my hands. Its pages filled not with words, but with lines upon lines of dense cryptographic code. I ran my fingers over the embossed symbols on the cover. It was a cipher I had designed myself, a lifetime ago. A complex, multi-layered system I'd created as a thought exercise at MIT. One I'd shown only to Richard. He had called it unbreakable. This was it. The architecture of his real life. My life's work, twisted and repurposed. For hours, I sat in that cold, sterile room, the world outside ceasing to exist. The symbols on the page, at first a confusing jumble, began to swim into focus. The forgotten pathways of my own mind began to reopen. It was like remembering a language I hadn't spoken in decades. I couldn't decipher it all, not yet. But I could see the patterns. I could see the structure. It wasn't a security company, it was a marketplace, a high-stakes, illegal information brokerage dealing in corporate espionage, political secrets, and personal data on an unimaginable scale. Sterling Enterprises, the legitimate tech giant, was just the public face, the clean engine that powered a vast, hidden criminal network. Richard hadn't built a company, he had built an empire on secrets, using the very tools I had given him. I left the bank with the ledger and the phone concealed in my handbag. Back in the house, in the forced quiet of my room, I made a decision. I called David Chen. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice steady. "It's Emily Sterling. I have a question regarding my husband's estate." "I am listening, Emily." His voice was the same, a flat line of professionalism. "I would like to make a formal inquiry into the full list of assets held by Sterling Enterprises and its subsidiary shell corporations. Specifically, I am interested in any privately held, non-public data servers." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat just long enough for me to know he understood the implication. "That is a significant request," he said carefully. It would require a substantial discovery process. Are you certain you wish to proceed? I am certain, I said, and hung up. I had fired the first shot. I did not have to wait long for the retaliation. It came 2 days later. A courier delivered a thick manila envelope addressed to me. Liam intercepted it at the door, bringing it to my room with a look of smug pity on his face. Something for you, Mother. Looks official. Do you need me or Chloe to read it for you? I can manage, thank you, Liam, I said, taking the envelope from his hand. His condescension was a whetstone, sharpening my resolve. I waited until he left, his footsteps retreating down the hall. I slit the envelope open. Inside was a stack of legal documents bound by a thick metal clip. The heading on the first page made my blood run cold. Petition for conservatorship. I read on, my eyes scanning the cold, legalistic prose. Liam and Chloe Sterling, petitioners. Emily Sterling, respondent. The words leaped off the page, each one a calculated strike. Due to a marked and persistent cognitive decline, an inability to manage her own financial and personal affairs, suffering from delusions and paranoia, and then, the centerpiece of their argument, the evidence they presented as irrefutable proof, my demonstrated and complete technological illiteracy. They cited my inability to use the smart home features, my confusion over the television remote, my struggle with the tablet Maya had tried to teach me to use. Every moment of feigned helplessness, every confused question I had asked to maintain my cover as a harmless old woman, was now being used as a weapon to declare me mentally incompetent. They weren't just trying to put me in a home, they were trying to legally erase my mind. To have me declared a non-person, an empty vessel whose assets and life could be managed by them without question or consequence. It was a brilliant, cruel move. They were using the very cage I had helped build to prove I was an animal, unfit to live outside of it. The rage that filled me was not hot and explosive, but cold and dense, like a block of dry ice. It didn't burn, it froze, clarifying everything. This was no longer about a house or an inheritance. It was a war for my own existence. That night, the house was silent again, but this time the quiet was mine. Liam and Chloe were out, likely celebrating their clever legal maneuver with their soulless friends. I sat at my small desk, the legal petition on one side, Richard's ledger on the other. The petition was an attack on my mind. The ledger was the key to defending it. I had to break the code, all of it. I turned on the small desk lamp, its pool of light creating a small island in the darkness of the room. I opened the ledger to the first page. For hours I worked. The process was agonizingly slow. My mind, so long fallow, resisted. The cryptographic pathways were overgrown with the weeds of disuse. I scribbled equations on a notepad, my hand cramping. I tested algorithms, ran permutations, cross-referenced symbols. It felt like trying to excavate a buried city with a teaspoon. Slowly, painstakingly, fragments began to emerge. Transaction logs, coded client names, offshore account numbers. It was the skeleton of the illegal empire, just as I'd suspected. But then, tucked away in the final section of the ledger, I found something else. It wasn't written in the complex cipher. It was written in a simpler, private code Richard and I had used for love letters when we were young. A simple substitution cipher we thought was clever and romantic. Seeing it felt like a punch to the gut. My fingers trembled as I translated the familiar symbols. This section wasn't a log of business dealings, it was a narrative. Richard's notes. And the title at the top of the page shattered what was left of my heart. Dead Man's Switch, the Kasparov contingency. I read on, the blood draining from my face. It was a detailed, meticulously crafted plan, a strategy to be enacted in the event that his criminal enterprise was ever on the verge of being exposed. It was a plan to save himself by sacrificing me. He described me in loving, damning detail. My brilliant Emily, one line read, a reclusive genius, too fragile for the pressures of the outside world. Her mind is a palace and a prison. He had written a complete, believable fiction wherein I was the true mastermind. He painted a picture of a brilliant but emotionally unstable woman, a master cryptographer who ran the entire illicit network from the shadows of our home, while he, her loving husband, was merely the public face, a man trying desperately to protect and contain her dangerous brilliance. If the worst comes to pass, he had written, the narrative must be that I was a pawn in her game. Her obsession with codes and patterns became a pathology. I was trapped, trying to manage the fallout of her genius. He had even fabricated diary entries, notes, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs that would lead directly to me, casting him as the tragic, manipulated figurehead. He had documented my, quote, instability, my reclusive nature, my aversion to technology, which he knew was a lie, as proof of a brilliant mind's descent into madness. The man I had given my life to, the man for whom I had sacrificed a career, a name, a legacy, the man whose children I had raised while his empire, built on my intellectual fire, grew in the dark. He had looked at me, at my love and my sacrifice, and had seen nothing more than a convenient scapegoat, an escape hatch. My entire life, my entire marriage, had been a lie. The grief was a physical force. It buckled my knees, and I slid from the chair onto the floor, the ledger falling open beside me. The air was gone from my lungs. It wasn't the sharp pain of a fresh wound. It was the sickening, hollow ache of discovering that the entire foundation of your life was rotten. The love I had held on to, the memories I had cherished, the very identity of Richard's wife that I had worn for half a century, it all crumbled into dust. There were no tears. Tears were for sadness, for loss. This was something colder, something far more profound. It was the erasure of a life. He had planned to bury me to save himself, and our children, with their petition for conservatorship, were simply finishing the job. I lay on the floor for what felt like hours, the pattern of the Persian rug pressing into my cheek. The ghost of Richard Sterling didn't just haunt this house. He had planned to possess my very soul. And in that moment, the grief died. It was cauterized by a rage so pure and so absolute it was almost serene. The woman who had loved Richard Sterling was gone. The woman who had mourned him was gone. What was left was Kasparov's ghost, and she had a score to settle. I pushed myself up from the floor. My body ached, but my mind was a blade. I looked at the burner phone sitting on the desk. I looked at the tablet Maya had given me, the one she had in her sweet, innocent attempt to help her confused grandmother, granted full root administrator access to the entire Sterling home network. An unwitting accomplice. My children thought my technological illiteracy was their greatest weapon. They had no idea it was about to become their undoing. I picked up the burner phone. It felt light, insignificant, but it was a key. I powered it on. The screen glowed with a simple text-based interface. It was a closed-loop communication device, linked directly to the core servers of Richard's network. A backdoor for the king. Using the initial access codes from the ledger, I connected the phone to the home network via the tablet. I was in. Or so I thought. With the admin privileges Maya had given me, I should have been able to move through the network like a phantom. I could see the outer layers, the public-facing architecture of Sterling Enterprises, the smart home systems, the public servers. It was my own design, elegant and familiar. But when I tried to push deeper toward the encrypted servers referenced in the ledger, the heart of the illegal brokerage, I hit a wall. It was a wall I didn't recognize, a fortress. The simple, elegant defenses I had built decades ago were still there, but they were now merely the decorative outer fence of a modern-day citadel. Richard, or someone he'd hired, had built on top of my work. They had layered on new security protocols, quantum encryption, honeypots, and AI-driven defense systems that actively hunted for intruders. My old keys no longer fit the new locks. I tried to use my old override codes, the master keys I had hard-coded into the original source. Access denied. I tried to exploit the back doors I had built for myself. Secret passages only I knew. They had been sealed, concreted over. The system I was trying to penetrate was a labyrinth, and it was actively fighting back. Alarms I couldn't see were likely screaming in some dark server room. Digital sentries were probably already tracing my point of entry. It was Richard's paranoia, made manifest in code. He had been a genius at recognizing talent, but his true gift was his fear. His fear had been a better architect than my genius ever was. He had built a system so complex, so hostile, that even its original creator was now an outsider. I was locked out of the core systems. I was a ghost again, haunting the periphery, unable to touch the world I had created. Frustration coiled in my stomach, the petition for conservatorship, the ultimate betrayal in the ledger, and now this digital fortress. Every path was blocked. Every door was barred. I felt the weight of my age, of the years I had spent away from the game. Was I too late? Was I too old? Had the world I helped create moved on so far that I could no longer even understand its language? I stared at the screen, at the blinking cursor of a command prompt that refused my every command. Denied, denied, denied. The word echoed the narrative my children were trying to write for me. Denied access to my home, my memories, my own mind. I leaned back in my chair, the wood groaning in protest. The cold fury from before began to solidify into something else, something harder, resolve. They thought I was a relic. Richard thought I was a disposable pawn. The system he built thought I was an intruder. They were all wrong. I was not an intruder. I was the foundation. And a foundation, no matter how deeply buried, knows the weaknesses of the house. I couldn't break down the front door. Fine. I would find a crack in the cellar. I might be a ghost in this machine, but a ghost knows the secret passages. A ghost remembers where all the bodies are buried. This time, I wasn't just rattling the chains. I was going to pull them and bring the whole damn house down. I play their game. It begins the day after David Chen leaves, the obsidian queen cool and heavy in my pocket, a silent promise. The mask of the dotty, grieving widow is one I find surprisingly easy to wear. It is, after all, the role they wrote for me. The one they have been rehearsing me for years. My performance must be flawless. Chloe sits beside me on the silk brocade sofa, the one Richard bought after his first big public success. The irony is so thick I can almost taste it. She has a stack of glossy brochures fanned out on the mahogany coffee table. The Silver Pines, Willow Creek Gardens, Sunset Meadows. They sound like idyllic cemeteries for the living. "Look at this one, Mum," she says, her voice oozing a sickly condescending sweetness that coats my skin like oil. "It has a water aerobics class. You always loved the water." I haven't been in a pool in 20 years. She wouldn't know that. She points to a picture of a smiling silver-haired woman in a pristine, sun-drenched room. The woman looks happy, but her eyes are vacant, polished smooth by routine and resignation. "And see, they have a 24/7 nursing staff. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We wouldn't have to worry about a thing." There it is, the truth, slipped in like a pickpocket's hand. Their peace of mind, not mine. I lean forward, putting on a show of squinting at the page. I let my hand tremble just slightly as I reach for the brochure. The paper is slick and heavy, expensive. They are sparing no expense to make my cage comfortable. "Oh, that does look clean," I murmur, my voice a pale, reedy version of its former self. I trace the picture of the smiling woman. "Do you think they have good Wi-Fi?" Maya was trying to show me how to do the video calls. Chloe pats my hand, a gesture that is meant to be comforting, but feels like a final nail being hammered down. "Of course they do, Mum. All the modern conveniences. You won't have to worry about any of that complicated stuff. They'll handle everything for you." She thinks Wi-Fi is the extent of my technological vocabulary. Perfect. I let my face fall into a mask of gentle confusion, of a woman adrift in a world that has moved on without her. That's good. It all seems so complicated now. She and Liam exchange a glance over my head. I don't need to see it. I can feel it. It's a look I've come to know well in the weeks since Richard's funeral. A mixture of pity, impatience, and self-congratulation. They are doing the right thing, the responsible thing. They are good children, managing their senile mother. Their underestimation is a thick, warm blanket. It is my greatest camouflage. Later that evening, Liam finds me standing in front of the main entertainment console, a vast black screen that dominates the living room wall. It's a Sterling Dynamics product, of course, a testament to Richard's vision and my architecture. I designed the foundational user interface logic for this very system 15 years ago on a yellow legal pad in my sewing room. "Having trouble, Mum?" His voice comes from behind me, startling me on purpose. He enjoys seeing me flinch. It confirms his narrative. I turn, feigning a small, helpless sigh. "Oh, Liam, I just wanted to watch the news. This remote, it has so many buttons. I don't know which one is for the television part." He takes the remote from my hand, his fingers brushing mine with a dismissive sort of impatience. He's a big man like his father, but he lacks Richard's quiet authority. Liam's presence is all bluster and entitlement. "It's not that hard, Mum. Look." He points the remote and the screen flickers to life. "This one is power, this is the channel guide, and this is volume, simple." He says simple as if it's a weapon, a word to remind me of my own inadequacy. He thinks he is teaching a toddler how to use a toy. He has no idea that I can see the back end of this system in my mind's eye, that I know the latency of its response time down to the millisecond, that I know the specific lines of code that govern the very functions he is so proudly demonstrating. "Oh," I say, my voice breathy with faux wonder. "Thank you, dear. You're so clever with these things." The praise lands perfectly. A smug, self-satisfied smile plays on his lips. "It's easy when you grow up with it, I guess." "Don't worry, Mum. In the new place they'll have everything set up for you. Probably just one button, nice and easy. He pats my shoulder and walks away, leaving me bathed in the blue light of the news channel. He leaves me in my gilded cage, confident that the lock is secure, that the inmate is docile.
He has no idea that I am not the prisoner. I am the warden, and I am about to burn the whole prison to the ground. Every night the transformation is absolute. The sun sets, and the frail, forgetful Emily Sterling dissolves like a phantom. The heavy silence of the mansion, once a source of suffocating loneliness, becomes my sanctuary. I lock my bedroom door, a gesture my children see as a sign of elderly paranoia, and the world shifts. My room becomes a command center. The tablet Maya gave me, the one Chloe and Liam saw as a pacifier for a confused old woman, is my weapon. With the root admin access, she so innocently granted, it is a master key to the kingdom. I don't sit at my little writing desk. I prop myself up in bed, the damask pillows supporting my back, the tablet glowing in the darkness. My face reflected on the screen is not the face of a grieving widow. It's a face I haven't seen in 30 years. The lines of concentration are sharp, my eyes narrowed and focused. I am no longer Emily Sterling, the woman who was a footnote in her own husband's story. I am Kasparov's ghost. The name comes back to me like a phantom limb, an ache of a life I'd amputated long ago. It was my handle, my anonymous signature in the nascent days of the internet, back when the digital world was a wild frontier and I was one of its pioneers. Richard had thought it was a clever, masculine name. He never knew it was a tribute to Garry Kasparov, the grandmaster who saw the entire board, who could think 10 moves ahead, who knew that sometimes you had to sacrifice a piece to win the game. The Sterling Enterprises network is a fortress. It's my fortress. I built its foundations, laid its first stones, but it has grown, mutated. Liam and Chloe, with their expensive consultants, have added layers of security, new protocols, labyrinthine defenses meant to be impenetrable. They are formidable, but they are looking for threats from the outside. They never thought to guard against the architect herself. They never thought to look for the ghost in their own machine. For the first few nights, I am just an observer. I move through their digital world like a whisper, my presence masked by the administrative credentials. I watch data streams, access logs, internal communications. It's like walking through a house you built, but that others have since redecorated. The structure is mine, familiar, but the furniture is foreign. The sheer scale of Richard's secret empire is staggering. The legitimate business, Sterling Dynamics, is just the gleaming tip of a very dark iceberg. The real money, the torrents of it, flows through a shadow network of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and encrypted data brokerage services. He wasn't just in the security business, he was in the information business, and not the legal kind. My children are swimming in this filth, thinking it's a crystal clear ocean. They see the profits, the power, but they are blind to the criminality that underpins it all. They are children, playing with a loaded gun, and they think it's a toy. I try the obvious entry points to the core servers, the ones that hold the real ledgers. I am blocked. A new firewall, a sophisticated biometric security layer. My old credentials, even the ones David Chen's key unlocked, are useless here. Liam and Chloe have locked me out of the heart of my own creation. For a moment, a cold flash of despair hits me, the same despair I felt when they told me I was going to a home, when they cancelled my credit cards, the feeling of being erased. But then the ghost stirs. The part of me that Richard could never fully tame, that I could never fully bury. He never found all my secrets. Men like Richard, men like Liam, they are builders. They build walls.
I was always better at building doors. I close my eyes, ignoring the sleek, modern interface on the tablet. I go back. 30 years. I'm in a cluttered room at MIT, the air thick with the smell of ozone and old paper. I'm fueled by cheap coffee and the sheer, unadulterated joy of creation. I'm writing the source code for Richard's first security prototype, and like any good architect, I built myself a secret passage, not out of malice, but out of prudence. A what-if scenario, a personal emergency exit, a flaw so deeply embedded, so elegantly disguised as a redundant line of error-checking code that no one would ever think to look for it. A flaw Richard never found. My fingers fly across the virtual keyboard. It takes me hours, digging through layers and layers of updated code, peeling back the decades. It's an archaeological dig into my own mind. And then I find it. A single, elegant string of hexadecimal characters, hidden within a subroutine for data compression. My signature. My key. I type in the activation sequence. A command line interface flickers open on the screen. A stark black box with a blinking green cursor. It is a portal to the past. It is the back door to the entire Sterling Empire. I'm in. A wave of feeling so potent it almost makes me gasp, washes over me. It isn't triumph, not yet. It's recognition. It's the feeling of a lung expanding after being constricted for decades. My mind, which had felt clouded by grief and dulled by the suffocating routine of domesticity, suddenly feels razor-sharp. The fog lifts. The complex architecture of the network unfolds in my mind, not as a confusing maze, but as a beautiful, logical schematic. I can see the flow of data, the weak points, the heavily fortified vaults. It feels like breathing after being underwater for 30 years. It is the resurrection of Kasparov's ghost. From that night on, the game changes. During the day, I am Emily. I sit with Chloe discussing the pros and cons of Sunset Meadows versus Willow Creek. I nod with vacant-eyed sincerity as she talks about the importance of a structured social environment for people my age. I ask Liam to help me find the right HDMI input on the television, twice. I let them see the slow, steady decline they expect. I am a ghost in my own home, a relic they are waiting to politely store away. But at night, I am a god in their machine. My small, quiet room becomes the nerve center of a silent war. I begin to map the network in earnest. I trace the flow of illicit money from its source, blackmail, illegal surveillance, corporate espionage, through a dizzying array of shell companies with names like Patriot Data Solutions and Viridian Logistics. I watch it being laundered through legitimate-looking investments, real estate, and art acquisitions, before finally landing in encrypted digital wallets controlled by my children. I identify the assets, not just the money, but the information. The terabytes of compromised data Richard had collected over the years, the secrets of politicians, the vulnerabilities of rival corporations, the personal indiscretions of powerful people. This wasn't just a business. It was a web of control, a library of compromat that gave Sterling its true power. Richard hadn't built a company. He'd built a weapon of mass destruction. And he had left the launch codes to our arrogant, clueless children. And, I remember with a fresh wave of cold fury, he had built a frame to place it all on me. My mind works with a clarity and speed that feels intoxicating. Every connection I uncover, every hidden file I decrypt, is a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The Emily who arranged flowers and planned dinner parties is gone. In her place is a cold, calculating strategist. The grief for Richard has curdled into something else, something harder and more useful.
It has become fuel. One night, deep in their encrypted email server, I find it, the key to their downfall. It's a series of messages between Liam and a man named Marcus Thorne. I know the name.
Thorne was Richard's most bitter and ruthless rival. They had fought over contracts, poached each other's employees, and publicly denigrated each other for 2 decades. Richard despised him, not just as a competitor, but as a man. He considered Thorne to be a vulture, a bottom feeder with no ethics. And my children are planning a merger with him. I read the proposal. It's a foolish, greedy move born of desperation and ego. Liam and Chloe don't have Richard's strategic mind. They see the short-term profit, the glamour of combining 2 major firms to create an industry titan. They want to seal their legacy, to step out of their father's shadow by doing the one thing he never would. They see it as a brilliant coup. I see it as a fatal mistake. And I see an opportunity. Marcus Thorne is not just a rival. He is the perfect patsy. He has a reputation for hostile takeovers and corporate raiding. His ethics are already questionable in the public eye.
If the Sterling Shadow Empire were to be exposed, who would be the more likely culprit? A pair of grieving children inheriting their sainted father's company, or the notorious predator who swooped in to seize control after his death? The narrative writes itself. The mission shifts. Reconnaissance is over. The time for silent observation is past. Now I begin to plant the seeds. It is meticulous, painstaking work. It requires more than just skill. It requires artistry. I cannot simply delete their names and insert his. That would be clumsy, easily detected. I have to create a new history. I have to become a forger, a ghostwriter of corporate crime. My nights become a blur of code and deception. I start with the transaction logs. I find the primary ledgers for the illicit funds buried deep within a nested series of encrypted servers. Using the back door, I gain write access. I don't erase the transfers to Liam and Chloe's accounts. Instead, I begin a slow, careful process of rerouting. I create a new set of digital pathways, a complex series of ghost accounts and anonymous transfers that all originate from servers traced back to Thorne Technologies. I create a false trail, one that shows the money flowing from Richard's network, not to his children, but being siphoned off, redirected, and embezzled by his greatest rival. I make it look like a hostile digital takeover that began the moment Richard's heart stopped beating. I spend an entire week on a single project, crafting a series of fake communications. I create encrypted emails between Thorne and several of Richard's disgruntled former employees. Employees Thorne had actually poached years ago. In these fabricated messages, they discuss the plan to seize control of Sterling's secondary assets after Richard's passing. I study Thorne's writing style from public documents, mimicking his syntax, his preferred jargon. I even embed subtle metadata in the files to make them look like they were created months before the merger talks even began. It is a masterpiece of digital ventriloquism. The most delicate part is the data itself, the library of blackmail. I can't just move it. I need to frame Thorne as the mastermind, the one who orchestrated it all. I find a vulnerability in the security of Thorne's own corporate network, a sloppy piece of work, something I would never have allowed. It's almost insulting. I use it to plant a series of encrypted folders deep within his company's servers. Inside these folders, I place copies of the most damning files from Richard's vault. Then I create a master file, a Rosetta Stone that contains the decryption keys for all of it. This master file, this key to the entire criminal enterprise, I digitally watermark with a fragment of source code unique to Thorne Technologies' proprietary software.
I make it look like his signature is on the murder weapon. Every move is precise. Every altered timestamp, every rerouted packet of data, every line of fabricated code is a nail being hammered into Marcus Thorne's coffin, and by extension, into the coffin of my children's ambitions. It's a strange, cold feeling. There is no rage, no pleasure. Just the quiet, grim satisfaction of a complex problem being solved. I am detaching a diseased limb to save the body. My children, in their greed, have become part of the disease Richard created. I am cutting them out. One morning, after a long night spent building Thorne's digital cage, Chloe comes into my room without knocking. I'm sitting in my armchair by the window, the brochure for Sunset Meadows in my lap. I make sure my face is slack, my eyes distant. "Mum," she says, her voice tight with an excitement she's trying to contain. "Liam and I have some wonderful news. We're going to secure the company's future. The Sterling legacy." I look up at her, blinking slowly, as if pulling myself out of a fog. "Legacy? That's nice, dear." She smiles, a brilliant predatory flash of teeth. "It is. It's very good news. We're making your husband, our father, very proud." I just nod. I look down at the brochure in my hands, at the smiling, vacant woman in the sun-drenched room. I feel a flicker of something that might be pity for Chloe. She is so sure of her world, so confident in the game she thinks she's winning. She has no idea that the board has been flipped. She and Liam think they are the players, moving their pieces, claiming their victory. They don't realize they are just pawns, and a ghost is moving them into position for the final, devastating sacrifice. The air in the Sterling Thorne merger announcement party was thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. It was held in the grand ballroom of a boutique hotel in Palo Alto, a space designed to exude modern power, all polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass, a minimalist art that cost more than a suburban home. Hundreds of Silicon Valley's new royalty milled about, their voices a low, confident hum, the sound of money talking to money. They held champagne flutes like scepters, their gazes constantly scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. I watched it all, not from a shadowed corner, but from the network I now owned. My command center wasn't a room, it was the digital ghost that haunted the very infrastructure of their lives. Through the discreet security cameras I had long since commandeered, I had a dozen perfect views. I saw every smug smile, every conspiratorial whisper. Liam stood at the podium, his posture radiating a smugness he had mistaken for confidence. He had my late husband's height, but none of his substance. He wore a ridiculously expensive, tailored suit that couldn't hide the soft paunch of a life lived without struggle. Beside him, Chloe was a vision in shimmering silver, her smile as sharp and brittle as a shard of glass. She held her champagne flute with a practiced elegance, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, cataloguing influence, tallying net worth. And between them stood Marcus Thorne, a man who had been my husband's most vicious competitor. He was a shark in a sea of piranhas, his grin wide and predatory. They formed a triptych of avarice, basking in the glow of spotlights that felt less like illumination and more like an interrogation lamp. "Thank you all for coming," Liam began, his voice amplified throughout the ballroom, smooth and unctuous. He had always been good at public speaking, at selling a narrative. It was a skill he'd learned from his father. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a merger, we celebrate a vision, a future." He paused for effect, letting the weight of his empty words settle over the sycophantic audience. "My father, Richard Sterling, built an empire on the bedrock of security and innovation. He was a titan, a legend. From my silent digital perch, A bitter laugh caught in my throat. He was a salesman, Liam. A charismatic front for my work. I watched as a massive smart screen behind them, a monolith of black glass, displayed a rotating slideshow of Richard's most flattering photos. Richard shaking hands with politicians, Richard on the cover of Forbes, Richard on his yacht, his face tanned and creased in a triumphant smile. The official, sanitized history of a man whose real story was buried in encrypted ledgers. But a legacy is not a monument to be admired, Liam continued, his voice rising with false passion. It is a foundation upon which to build something even greater. For too long, Sterling Industries has been reverent, too tied to the old ways. It's time to be disruptive. It's time to be aggressive. Chloe stepped forward, her turn. My brother is right. With the unparalleled market aggression of Thorn Technologies and the foundational strength of Sterling Industries, we are forging a new paradigm. This isn't just a partnership, it's a coronation. The crowd applauded, a wave of sound that was both enthusiastic and entirely transactional. They were applauding their own future profits. Marcus Thorne took the microphone, his voice a low rumble. Richard Sterling was a worthy opponent, he said, a lie so blatant it was almost admirable. They had despised each other, but he was of a different era, an era of caution. Liam, Chloe and I, we share a more forward-thinking philosophy. The future belongs to the bold, and tonight we take it. He raised his glass. Liam and Chloe mirrored the gesture, their faces alight with greedy triumph. To the future, Liam declared, his voice booming. To a new empire, Chloe echoed, her eyes shining. To us, Thorne finished, his smile a predator's slash. The three of them turned to the screen, ready to clink their glasses together as the final heroic image of Richard Sterling was meant to fill the space behind them. It was the perfect photo op. The passing of the torch, the dawn of a new, ruthless age. I watched them, my children and their new partner, three fools on a stage, so blinded by their own brilliance they couldn't see the abyss opening beneath their feet. My finger hovered over the execution command on my tablet. It was a simple, elegant string of code I'd written myself. A digital guillotine. To the Empire, Liam repeated, his glass moving toward Chloe's. It was time. I tapped the screen. The first sign something was wrong was imperceptible to most. A single, almost subliminal flicker on the giant screen behind the triumphant trio. A digital stutter. A few people in the front row frowned, a momentary confusion passing over their faces before being washed away by champagne-fueled optimism. Liam, Chloe and Marcus didn't notice. They were lost in their moment, their glasses just inches from contact.
Then it happened again. A more pronounced flicker.
The triumphant image of Richard on his yacht wavered, dissolving into a brief shower of static, like a ghost trying to hold its form. A low hum emanated from the speakers, a discordant electronic note that cut through the ambient chatter. The murmur of the crowd began to falter. Heads turned towards the stage, no longer with admiration, but with a dawning unease. Liam's smile tightened. He shot a venomous look at a technician in the wings, a silent promise of termination. Chloe's perfectly poised hand trembled, just slightly. Thorne's eyes narrowed, the first flicker of suspicion dawning in their depths. He was a predator, and predators are the first to sense a trap. Then the image of Richard Sterling collapsed entirely. It didn't just switch off. It died. It fractured into a million pieces of light, the colours draining away into a void of pure, silent black. The sudden darkness on the screen was absolute,
Sucking all the celebratory energy from the room.
A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Into that void, something new began to form. It started as a faint outline, a whisper of light against the black. Slowly, it solidified. It was not a corporate logo, it was not a photo, it was a stark, spectral image rendered in ghostly white. A king chess piece, but ethereal, almost translucent, as if woven from digital smoke. My emblem, the sigil I had created for myself decades ago. The one Richard had called my little secret. The logo of Kasparov's ghost. A new sound filled the room, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. A soft, deliberate click. Then another, and another. It was the sound of a keystroke, clean and cold. Beneath the ghostly king, a single word began to type itself out. Letter by agonizing letter, each one glowing with a malevolent, blood-red light. C-H-E. C-K. The faces of my children were masks of pure, uncomprehending shock. Liam's mouth hung slightly open, the toast forgotten. Chloe's face had gone pale, the silver of her dress making her look like a statue of terror. Marcus Thorne took a half step back, his instincts screaming at him. He knew this symbol. Every serious player in the dark corners of the tech world knew this symbol. It was a boogeyman, a myth. The legendary hacker who could shatter firewalls and topple corporations. A ghost. M-A-T-E. Checkmate. The word hung there, glowing, pulsing in the silence. It wasn't a statement, it was a judgment. The moment the final letter appeared, the room erupted, but not with applause, a single phone buzz, then another, then 100. It was a tidal wave of digital panic, the synchronized vibration of an entire ecosystem discovering it was poisoned. News alerts flashed on every screen, on every watch face, a cascade of ruin. Wall Street Journal. FBI raids Thorne Technologies in sweeping corporate espionage probe. Reuters. SEC announces emergency freeze on all assets of Sterling Industries and Thorne Technologies, citing massive systemic fraud. TechCrunch. Anonymous hacker Kasparov's ghost dumps decades of incriminating financial data, implicating Sterling and Thorne in illegal information brokering ring. The blood drained from Liam's face, leaving it a waxy, clammy grey. His eyes, wide with horror, darted to his smartwatch. I had made sure the feed from his own device was routed to a small window on my screen. I watched him tap the face, his hand shaking uncontrollably. I watched as the balance of his private, offshore crypto wallet, the one he thought was untraceable, a repository for his inheritance and his illicit gains, flickered. $247,830,112.54. Flicker. $0 and $0. Flicker, he let out a choked, strangled sound, a noise of pure animal despair. Beside him, Chloe was hyperventilating. Her perfectly manicured hand clutched to her chest. Her own watch displayed the same brutal, beautiful number. 0. Everything they had stolen, everything they had plotted for, had been siphoned away into a labyrinth of accounts I controlled, destined not for my pockets, but for a foundation that would undo the kind of damage they and their father had wrought. The data dump hadn't just exposed them, it had rerouted every last cent they possessed. The seeds I had planted in their transaction logs had bloomed into a forest of undeniable evidence, leading every algorithm, every investigator, not to me, but directly to Marcus Thorne as the mastermind who had corrupted the Sterling children. It was a flawless, airtight narrative. My narrative. Panic consumed the ballroom. The air of smug superiority evaporated, replaced by the stench of raw fear. Guests were scrambling for the exits, their faces pale, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive ground zero of the Sterling Thorn implosion. They were rats deserting a sinking ship. Through the chaos, a group of men and women in dark, crisp suits moved with a calm, predatory purpose. They weren't the hotel's security, they were federal agents. They ignored the fleeing guests, their eyes fixed on one target. They formed a silent, closing circle around Marcus Thorne. He stood frozen, his champagne glass still in his hand, his mind unable to process the speed of his own destruction. An agent stepped forward, not speaking loudly, but his voice cut through the noise. "Marcus Thorne, you are under arrest." The champagne flute slipped from Thorne's numb fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the thick, expensive carpet with a dull, pathetic thud, the sound of a fallen king. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, his eyes found mine. I wasn't on a screen anymore. I was standing at the entrance to the ballroom, having walked in unnoticed amidst the pandemonium. He stared at me, his mind finally connecting the impossible dots. The quiet, forgotten widow. The ghost. The room was a wreck of abandoned glasses, terrified whispers, and the flashing red and blue lights that now pulsed through the panoramic windows. Liam was slumped against the podium, his body shaking. Chloe was openly weeping, her tears carving black streaks through her perfect makeup. The architects of my obsolescence, now the rubble of their own ambition. The silence they had tried to condemn me to had now swallowed them whole. I began to walk forward. The sound of my simple, flat-heeled shoes on the marble floor was stark and clear in the stunned quiet. The few remaining guests parted before me, as if I were a spectre. I walked past the federal agents leading Thorne away, his face a mask of disbelief. I walked past the weeping remnants of the valley's elite. I stopped directly in front of my children. I held up my hand. In my palm rested the obsidian queen, the emissary from David Chen, the key Richard had left me. It was cool and solid against my skin, a piece of tangible darkness. It felt like the heart of the entire operation. Chloe looked up, her face streaked with tears and ruin. Her voice was a trembling, broken whisper. What did you do?" For the first time, they truly saw me. Not the dotty old woman who couldn't work a tablet, not the grieving widow to be managed and discarded, not their mother. Their eyes, wide with a terror that was profoundly satisfying, finally registered the truth. They saw the woman who had built the machine they had tried to use against her. They saw the architect, the ghost, the queen. I let the silence stretch, letting them suffocate in it. I looked from Liam's vacant, shattered expression to Chloe's desperate, pleading eyes. There was no pity in my heart. There was only the cold, clean satisfaction of a perfectly executed equation. "Your father taught me how to play chess," I said, my voice not loud, but it filled the cavernous space. It was as cold and clear as ice. "But he forgot to tell you the most important rule." I closed my fingers around the obsidian queen, its sharp edges pressing into my palm. The king is just a figurehead. The queen runs the board. The silence in the Atherton mansion was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of weight. The oppressive, gilded silence of my old life had been replaced by a clean, empty quiet. The movers had taken everything, their echoing footsteps the final punctuation mark on a 50-year-long sentence. I walked through the cavernous rooms one last time, my hand trailing along a wall that was no longer mine. There were pale rectangles where priceless art had hung, ghosts of a life I had curated but never truly owned. The air no longer smelled of Chloe's expensive, cloying perfume or the faint, metallic scent of Liam's ambition. It just smelled of dust and sunlight. The sale was brutally efficient, closing within a week. The name Sterling, once a key to any door, was now a liability. The buyers, a tech billionaire couple from somewhere else, wanted a quick, quiet transaction. They got it. I signed the papers in David Chen's office, the scratch of my pen the only sound. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany. It was the final accounting. The Kasparov protocol Richard had set up was more than a key. It was a firewall. It had meticulously separated the legitimate seed money of my original algorithms from the sprawling, cancerous growth of his illegal information brokerage. When the dust settled and the government had carved its pound of flesh from Thorn and the criminal side of the Sterling estate, what remained was mine. Clean, undisputed. A fortune built on a truth no one but Richard had known. My children, of course, assumed they would be taken care of. They had sent a lawyer, a junior associate with nervous eyes, to inquire about their rightful inheritance. David handled it with the cold precision I'd come to appreciate. He explained that Richard Sterling's personal estate was not only bankrupt, it was deeply in debt. The fines, the lawsuits, the clawbacks, they were astronomical. Liam and Chloe, as co-signatories on several of his more creative ventures, were not beneficiaries, they were debtors. They were left with nothing but their father's name, now a stain, and the public shame of his crimes, which I had so carefully laid at another man's feet. But the rot had started at home, and its stench clung to them. I felt no triumph in this, only a profound hollow ache. They were the architects of their own demise, but I was the architect of the world that had made them. There was no grand announcement. I didn't hold a press conference. Instead, I sat with a team of financial advisors and philanthropists for 3 days straight. We didn't talk about empire, we talked about opportunity. We didn't talk about power, we talked about support. On the 4th day, the Sterling Kasparov Foundation was born. Its mission was simple, etched onto the founding documents in plain, clear language: to provide grants, scholarships, and mentorship for women who had been pushed out, passed over, or forced to choose between their passion in STEM and the demands of a world that didn't make space for them. It was a multi-million-dollar apology. It was an investment in all the ghosts, all the secret weapons who deserved to be the face, the brain, and the name on the door. It was the legacy I chose, not the one I was given. The Atherton Mansion sale price was its first endowment, a gilded cage melted down to forge 1,000 keys. I didn't stay to watch the Foundation's first press release. My bags were already packed. 1 suitcase, a new laptop, and the Obsidian Queen, which felt cool and heavy in my carry-on. My new life doesn't have the echo of marble floors. It has the warm, worn texture of terracotta tiles under my bare feet. My apartment is small, but every window opens to the Arno River, the light in Florence a soft, honeyed gold that feels like a blessing. I wake up to the sound of church bells and the smell of roasting coffee, not the hum of a climate-controlled security system. Here I am not Mrs. Sterling, the reclusive widow. I am not Kasparov's ghost, the digital phantom. I am just Emily, a woman who likes to read in the afternoons and is still learning which vendor at the Mercato Centrale has the best tomatoes. The screen in front of me glows, not with lines of malicious code, but with Maya's face. Her expression is one of intense concentration, her brow furrowed, a pen stuck behind her ear. She's 16 and her mind is a firework display. Okay, so the loop iterates through the list, she murmurs, her fingers flying across her own keyboard thousands of miles away. But the conditional statement… wait, I see it. The indentation was off by one space. She fixes it, runs the program, and a triumphant grin spreads across her face. It works. It actually works. I lean back in my chair, a mug of tea warming my hands. You see, Python doesn't care who you are. It only cares about the integrity of the structure. It's honest. The logic is beautiful, Grandma, she says, her eyes shining with the pure, unadulterated joy of discovery. It's like a perfect little poem where every word has to be in exactly the right place. A warmth spreads through my chest that has nothing to do with the tea. This is my inheritance. Not the money, not the houses, not the name. This moment. This passing of a torch. It is, isn't it, I say. My voice softer than I intend. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. We spend another hour debugging her small project. A simple program to chart rainfall data for her science class.
It's a universe away from decrypting black market ledgers, and it feels more significant than any of it. It's creation, not destruction. Later that evening, while scrolling through a news site, I see it. A link to a viral video posted on TikTok. The caption reads, "Christmas shopping getting heated at Walmart, LOL." I click it, a strange detached curiosity pulling me in. The video is shaky, filmed on a phone. The location is the sprawling, bleak parking lot of a budget supermarket. And there they are, Liam and Chloe. Liam, his expensive suit rumpled, his face red and contorted with rage, is yelling, jabbing a finger at his sister. Chloe, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield, is screaming back, her voice thin and shrill. They're arguing over a dent in the door of a beat-up, decade-old sedan, arguing about whose fault it was, who was supposed to pay for the insurance, whose life was more ruined. They looked small, insignificant, two bitter ghosts, haunting a landscape of concrete and consumerism. They had lost the house, the money, the cars, the name. They had lost the game so spectacularly because they never even understood the board. I close the tab. I don't feel anger. I don't feel pity. I feel nothing at all. They are no longer a part of my world. They are just a story I used to know. I walk to my window and look out at the Ponte Vecchio, its lights twinkling on the dark water. The obsidian queen sits on my desk, a silent sentinel. They built their world around a king, a hollow crown their only prize. They spent their lives fighting for his favor, for a place at his side, blind to the power that truly moved the pieces. They never saw the queen coming. They never understood her reach, her silence, her patience. The board is clear now, and for the first time in 50 years, it's my turn to move.